G'day to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm just going on a bushwalk close to home on Saturday afternoon, and thought I'd invite you to join me on a walk and talk. So today's book summary that I'm going to go through is entitled Long Life Learning. Long Life Learning by an author named Weise. Michelle Weise is going to introduce us to a few points for us to consider about long life learning. And she kicks off her book with a quote which tries to position her thought processes, where she says the most valuable workers now and in the future will be those who can adapt to the changing needs of the workplace. I worked in corporate Australia for over 35 years. So there's a track which goes that way, and there's a track which comes across this way. So I crossed over from here, so I'll go back this way because it's coming to the end of the day and I don't want to be trapped out here by myself, not knowing what's happening as the sun goes down. So I've been working in corporate Australia for 35 years, and over those 35 years, even though I've worked in some of the best companies in the world, I've worked for IBM, I've worked for NCR, I've worked for Telstra, Optus, Advantra, Hudson, and a top-tier law firm called Allens. Even though I worked in the best sort of businesses and leaders in their field over the years and was part of a high-performing team, believe it or not, my role has been made redundant 5 times. So just as I'm building within each of those jobs and careers and building my network and my contribution, then something happens. In the early days, it was some ugly recessions. The recession that we had to have back in 1990. Thanks to Paul Keating. As I said, along the way, I've had to reset my career many times. So 5 times in 35 years. So I guess the big lesson there is that regardless of who you are, regardless of your contribution, and I am happy with the contribution I made, but you can't influence or you can't shape what the economy is going to do. And every time there's a management change within a business, within a team, each manager brings their own changes to the way they resource the team, to the resource requirements. And there are people that you can get on with, and some people who don't see your contribution, because you're constantly needing to prove yourself to your managers and to your team in order to survive. And some people, of course, are much better at communicating and selling themselves than others. Some people like to get on with the business and do their work. Other people spend a lot more of their time talking themselves up and making themselves known. But sooner or later, regardless of who you are and how good you are, you're going to get caught. And the sad thing is that the older you get, the greater the probability that you're going to be the first to get tapped on the shoulder and made redundant, because the business world I guess, has a penchant for new talent, for emerging talent, and are happy to allow younger people in the team to have a crack, and let go of the people who have got the most experience, but who are probably pulling a higher salary as well. So it's a game of snakes and ladders. We all understand it. We all live it. And sooner or later, you're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to continue doing what you're doing, or you're going to make a complete change and start a new career. So the author here reminds us that regardless of who you are, the people who are going to achieve the greatest success are those who are going to be able to adapt to the changes in the workplace. So sorry about the long-winded introduction. But the next point that the author makes is that technology has revolutionised the way we live and the way we work, and is going to continue to change for the entirety of our lives and our careers. So we can't hide from it. We can't hide from technology, because if you do, you'll get left behind. So we need to embrace it, I guess, is the key point. So, and with automation, with change, there are positives and negatives. It's made up of both. It can be both good and bad at the same time. But if you or your business, according to this author, fail to adapt and adopt to the changes, you're wiring yourself up for financial and social pain is the key lesson, I guess. I'm just going to keep on looking where I'm going, otherwise I'll end up in the creek here. So what else can we learn from here? The author makes another valuable point. It's a very contentious point, but we all know it. I guess we've all experienced it over our lives, given that we've been parents and grandparents. But the current education system that we have in Australia and in all, I guess, top-tier economies throughout the world is based on an outdated life path, according to the author. Because what the education system was good for in our grandparents' and parents' era potentially is no longer serving our children and grandchildren. If anything, it's holding them back. Because it no longer can guarantee a great job and financial stability. We need to continue to focus and to shape our children's destiny by helping them understand that we need to continually grow, adapt, change, and interact and stay connected. Stay connected to friends, family, work peers, because I think, as the old saying goes, if you're not visible, then you're easily, almost slipped over, you're easily forgotten and you easily become irrelevant. And one of the big challenges that everybody faces during this pandemic, especially the office workers, the keyboard jockeys, is that COVID-19, the pandemic, has forced us to work away from the office. So out of sight, out of mind, and we've got to be careful that we don't become, or for those who are working in an office environment, that you don't become tomorrow's statistic, because I guess change is always afoot. The author then mentions about the importance of education, on continual training. I always get upset and annoyed when I look at my daughters. They've worked, or they work, for some incredible organisations. And I once also worked for some of those top tier organisations. But when I was working back in the 80s, back in the 90s, companies like IBM, where I worked, invested thousands of dollars in training, growth and development programs for their staff. Back in the 80s, mid-80s, when you joined IBM as a graduate, I think back then they invested $100,000 in your growth and development, running programs, sales training, to make the sales people the best equipped in the marketplace. But these days, when I talk to young executives, the training focus from the corporate perspective is no longer as much of a priority. You know, how are you expected to grow and develop and to have a career if your partner, your business, doesn't want to invest in that career? It can't just be one-way traffic. But it's another point. Back in the day, a career was something that people aspired to. When I was working at IBM, my managers, a lot of the people that I worked with back then, were in the business there for 30, 40 years. And IBM had an employment principle then that they only took people in at the bottom as graduates and then promoted them through the business. It was very hard in days gone by to come in as a senior professional and come in above other people who had been in the system or in the organisation there for years. But that's the new world. That's the new challenge that people have to try and work within. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is it's still possible to invest in your own growth and development. I've generated through the 5am Club over 1,100 vlogs on book summaries. Book summaries which are specific to growth and development, and it's the sort of stuff that I would have loved to have had my hands on when I was in my 20s, in my teens, and throughout my career, where I can just listen to somebody talk for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and pick out 3 gems, 3 morsels of information that could help me in my career and growth. So let's continue. This is going to be a bit of a longer sort of vlog, so my apologies. I get carried away sometimes, but being out here in the forest, in the elements, I do get very motivated to express myself as best I can. So the future of work lies within the skills of the workforce, and sooner or later, doesn't matter who you are, sooner or later you're going to have a midlife crisis or a mid-career crisis, where you wake up one day and you wonder, you're at 40 years of age, and I must admit the worst time of my life was when I turned 40, because that was the realisation that if everything goes blissfully well in my life, I'm at halfway at best. So you wake up at some point and have a midlife crisis or a mid-career crisis, as I mentioned, and wonder what are you doing with your life and whether or not you feel fulfilled, whether or not it's going to lead you anywhere, and if you feel as if you need a change. And it happens to everybody. It happens to everybody. It doesn't matter how good you are, well-meaning you are, how much in love you are, how loyal you are, sooner or later you're going to wake up and question it. It's at that point where you raise those questions that your destiny is set in motion. Because as I mentioned before, sadly, those who are over 50 are trapped, because you can't just get up and leave your job and do nothing and travel the world and just go, driving into the sunset, because your superannuation, for most people, that superannuation is nowhere near enough. That's it, my internet connection is back. So as we're saying, you're just not going to have enough money. And it's made even worse, especially when you're, for those who are divorcing or those who are split up with their families. Because what happens is that both partners and children end up struggling, unless you're really, really well off and have really well off parents, or have had a business and had a windfall gain along the way. Most people, most families who divorce all of a sudden find that they need 2 houses, they need 2 cars, they need two incomes to provide for the children, and it becomes even more harrowing and painful, because we all have mortgages, we all have financial obligations, and all of those need work. They need money to fulfill. So we need to be flexible, and we need to be able to morph into our future, and to do it with as hard as it may be. The reality is you need a partner. You need somebody to share your future with, and you need that partner to share in the responsibilities of bringing up children financially and from a time perspective. But you also need somebody there just to comfort you during those ups and downs. There's a limit to how much parents can contribute. There's a limit to how much your friends and other family can contribute. But it's tough. I know it's tough. It's tough for everybody. And as we said before, training from a corporate perspective, from an employer perspective, has dropped off. They've gone stingy with their training dollars. So unless you're investing in yourself, you're going to be trapped. You're going to be on a path. You're going to be at crossroads of your life. You've woken up. You found out you're not in love with your work, your wife, your children, your family, your friends, yourself. Who knows? Everybody has those challenges, as we said. And then you're going to feel even worse when you know that you're trapped. There's nothing much you can do about it. So the author here suggests that an important strategy that one needs to consider is that you need to learn and work concomitantly. So you're doing both at the same time. So you're working, learning, growing, so you're prepared for whatever comes along the way, so that you can hop off and take another path, because you've got the skills, you've got the network, you've got the connections, you've got the support from those behind you in terms of your family and your friends. So you've got to be constantly thinking about your next step like a chess player, and to understand that you're not going to be able to avoid it, because automation, artificial intelligence are here to stay, and it's going to impact each and every one of us. And it's important not to be left behind, especially when you've got a 5 in front of your age, or a 6, or a higher number. So we need to acknowledge and embrace that there are changes apace, and there are always going to be changes apace. And the key is to learn on the job, keep on building your skills, and to do targeted training, which are short programs where you can acquire and build new skills and allow you to grow, develop, and to switch when the opportunity presents itself. The last point that the author makes in this book is that fairness and transparency in hiring are beneficial for all parties involved. How many times have we gone to an interview and they've sold us a picture, sold us a story in terms of how good they are, how good the job is, and how wonderful you are and how great a fit you'll be in their organisation. And then you join the group and then it's not quite what you imagined, and you feel like you're in a prison where you can't grow, develop, you can't express yourself. You're stuck in a hierarchy, a pecking order, which is only going to get tougher. And you've realised that you've probably made the wrong decision. You've been sucked in, but it's too late because you've left your other job, and doesn't look quite all that good on a resume when you're job hopping too often. So you've got to sit it out for a few years at least. So the author makes another important point, and I guess I agree with this because I've worked for a HR company, a recruitment company called Hudson. It used to be the old Morgan and Banks. But what they're saying is that the job matching process is less effective these days. It's flawed. Just like the dating process as well. Not that I've ever been on one of those sites, but I hear from a lot of guys that I work with. It's all flawed because you don't get to know the candidates. When I was working at Hudson years ago, there's no way a recruitment consultant would offer up a candidate for a job unless they'd interviewed them, unless they'd sat down with them for an hour and a half, had a good chat, gone through their resume, and knew intimately the strengths, the weaknesses, what they looked like, how they performed, put them under a bit of pressure in the interview process to see how they respond. Whereas these days, I've been to a lot of interviews, prior to my last role being made redundant, and people just take your resume, they flick it on, get you in for an interview, but it's not the same because they don't know you, and there's very little that they can do to support your application. So that's why, from this author's perspective, is that the system, the matching process, the recruitment process, is not as effective these days, and it's just a numbers game. Well, they'll flick on, 10 resumes, and they'll go through, 100 or 200, and they'll only pick those which stand out. And the ones that stand out are the ones where people are young. There's no way in the world you're going to pass on a resume of somebody who's 50 years of age or 40 years of age when you've got a half dozen resumes on your desk of people who are, in their 30s, who have got ample experience and who sound interesting and look interesting. It's just the reality of life. So for those people who suggest that ageism is not part of our organisations and our recruitment processes, should take a moment to have a look around the major corporations in Australia. Every single time there is a recession or the organisation goes through a right-sizing exercise where they make jobs redundant, basically shafting people, the people who first get shafted are the ones who are the oldest, the ones with a 5 in front of their age, the ones with a 6, just in case they've survived long enough. I remember years ago when I was at IBM talking with my friend Rowan Keynes, and basically back then saying, well, we're going to be lucky to be working as accountants, corporate accountants, when we're in our 40s. But luckily I got to my mid to late 50s and had a good run, a better run than what I expected. Anyway, the other thing that the author talks about is that we're in a world of credential inflation, that people are always looking for people with a lot more experience than what they need to get the job done. Degrees and master's degrees now have become the prerequisite when they're not required in the job. And I guess I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for joining me on this afternoon session of Jim's 5am Club, where I'm able to come down here and go for a lovely walk through the bush on this wonderful afternoon. We've had plenty of rain. It's green, the water's running, and it's springtime. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good rest of the day, and I look forward to coming to you again from a different location with a different message, a message of empowerment, where we can have a chit-chat and you can vicariously join me on this journey, regardless of where I'm coming to you from, but I'll try and make it interesting so that we can both benefit. Take care, yasas, and bye for now. Cheerio.